if I'm not mistaken, today's sessions or your professional development is around community colleges specifically, right? And so I'm happy to be able to share a little bit about how we can support Latinx identified students. And so as a quick context, I'll go into it more. The main aspect of my discussion is going to center around a policy brief that I wrote for NASPA, which is a student affairs professionals and leaders, membership organization. I know a lot of you are likely either members, have attended conferences, either regional or national. And so that's where a lot of this work came to be. And so I'm excited to be able to share that with you all, all right? I will go through my hour by sharing a little bit about myself and the work that we did together. I had some co-authors, so I'll talk about them as well. And then I'll also dedicate some time to splitting you up into a breakout room for a discussion and bring you back in, hopefully, for some follow-up. So I'll just need Joel's help to facilitate that final piece of the discussion. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start my share screen, and we'll get going. All right.
Just very quickly, for those of you who weren't able to see on the chat box, this part of the presentation, it's going to be recorded. So we just wanted to share with folks. Dr. Ignacio is going to be recorded. So thank you.
Okay, I believe you should be able to see my screen, right? Yeah. All right. Then. All right. Okay. So again, as Mary has mentioned, my name is Dr. Ignacio Hernandez, colloquially known as Nacho. I think everyone has a Tío Nacho in their family, maybe Abuelito. It's one of those names that, I grew up sort of wondering, oh gosh, really is my name in a culture where, most kids are, had trouble pronouncing that. A lot of my instructors, teachers also, but as I've, matured through my 30s onto my 40s, soon to be 40, I really do appreciate that name. And so, yeah, quick background there. So most of my friends call me Nacho. I'll leave some contact information. My Twitter handle is actually Nacho PhD. So as Mary mentioned, I'm an associate professor at Fresno State, formerly known as California State University, Fresno. In that capacity, I serve as associate professor in the Department of Educational Leadership, and I serve as the EDD program director as well. So for today's talk, like I said, I'm going to focus on a policy piece that we wrote, focused on how to support Latinx, Latino students in community colleges. So first and foremost, I'd like to give my sincere thanks to Mary, to Reina, Anaya, and to Joel for inviting me here. Reina and Mary gave me a lot of important context about your association, some of the needs that you have, and it really is an honor for me to be here. And so I just want to say thank you to both you, Mary and Reina, for that the help that you provided for me as we planned and prepared. This was supposed to happen in March, right? And right when states, hopefully smart states began shutting things down and airline travel was really becoming limited, and just the issue of public health. So I'm glad that we made this able to work. So here we are. So today's outline, I'm going to take you through, like I said, a series of slides. I like to start with sharing a little bit about me. I think it's important to understand who your speakers are and get to know me. I mean, I'm a person just like you are, right? And so I like to share that piece, because without that, I think some of the research or the academic side of things might be a little hollow. And so I want to start with that first. I'll discuss the five things in like italics is is a brief policy brief series from NASPA's Research and Policy Institute. Again, I had two co-authors, so I'll introduce them a little bit as well. I'll discuss what I hope that you all can learn from today's presentation. I'll actually discuss the 5 things at some point. We'll do a bit of a breakout discussion, and then I like to end my presentations with a series of enduring questions so that, you know, I don't pretend to answer everything, right? I just hope that the information that I do share can illuminate, maybe pose some new questions for you all, maybe even help you unlearn some of the things that you thought were to be true, and then, you know, just maybe stimulate discussion for the rest of the day or for a couple of hours after. So about me, my mom and dad were my first teachers, and so I like to share these photos. They were my first educators, so I find my work now as an associate professor and, you know, EDD program director. This is a role that has heavy administrative load, although I'm still a faculty member, right? I'm still protected by my tenure rights and my faculty union. So I'm not a true administrator in that sense, but I do have administrative duties. In this role, I contribute to, you know, the academic preparation of higher ed and student affairs practitioners and educational leaders across P12 and higher ed. I think it makes that role a lot more rewarding, considering that, you know, I like to remember that this little dude wearing that charro hat or the little sombrero right there in that ET, you know, emblematic of the early 80s, that ET sweater. You know, my first lessons were at home, right? They were with my parents, humbly educated parents, and they did anything they could to make sure that, you know, that me and my siblings had a strong focus on education. And so I'm proud to have worked with so many good people like Mary during their own graduate education. And so, yeah, I like, you know, I take this moment about thinking about, you know, where I come from to also give a shout out to where we've been and where we're going. And so thank you again, Mary. You were a great student when we were here at Fresno State. I know it was a big loss to the campus. And so congratulations on your recent appointment of AVP of Enrollment Management at Metropolitan State University in Denver. So that's a big highlight for our own program as well. And so I think that's a really special achievement as well. And so Colorado, you're happy to have, or you're glad to have her, I'm sure. Like many educators, I'm sure you all know, well, at least those of you who know me, Dr. Del Real is in the audience too. We're Manny, or I call him Manny, but you all call him Dr. Manuel Del Real. He's also at Metropolitan State. If you know me, you probably get a pretty quick in our conversations. You understand how deeply I believe in public community colleges. Without California's public higher education system and all the various faculty, staff, support workers, all the different support programs, EOP&S in particular, who cared for me as a student and person, I wouldn't be here today. You know, I've earned my terminal degree in my field, but as I often tell students that I work with, and today to you all, it's my community college degree that I feel so very proud of. And that's that picture right there where I'm wearing that crimson regalia there. That was me receiving my Associate of Arts degree in 2003. Yeah, 2003. I went to a community college called Mount San Antonio College in Eastern Los Angeles County, one of California's largest community colleges. And so that, you know, it's really, I have 4 degrees on my wall, AA all the way to PhD, but it's the AA that makes me feel the proudest. It's where I feel like I learned how to learn all over again. It's where I found my trajectories to higher education, and I found that people truly and honestly cared about helping me, you know, move forward. So yes, that was the catalyst for me moving forward to higher education, where I transferred over to Long Beach State after that. And my time in the community college and the various roles I served as a student and then as a paraprofessional, you know, were my catalyst and my motivation for the research that I do. And through my research and these professional commitments, again, I've had privileges of building relationships with higher ed leaders across the country, Elena Lucero Sandoval, one of them who's in your audience, in the audience here as well. A bunch of great people all over Colorado and, you know, across the country as well. Teaching at Fresno State has allowed me to work with grad students who I feel have taught me, right? They've taught me how to really refocus our imagination to be more inclusive, how to imagine a more just future in higher education and student affairs in particular. So I like to share this about myself because anything that I offer as a scholar and as an educator, I feel needs to be understood within the context of my own educational pathway. So that pathway started with, you know, of course, as I mentioned, with my parents. And in my house, where I grew up in LA County, you know, my parents came from Mexico in 1970, 1971, something like that. Yeah, I knew from an early age that it was about trabajo, right? We had to work. My dad right there, the guy in the glasses on the right, he worked in a factory it's called City of Industry in LA County, a very heavy industrious city, a lot of factories. And I knew that my mom worked early on in a sewing factory, costura. I don't know if you have family that does that kind of work, but she used to put zippers on pieces of clothing, right? And that sort of work is, you know, low value, low paid, but it's really important work in the garment industry, right? So I always knew that, you know, that there was a lot of lucha. They struggled, but they also always went to work, and they, you know, never really had a day off. So, you know, I never really bought into the concept of Santa Claus, right? Like Christmas at our house was about, you know, no, there was no guy in a red suit bringing you this. We worked, and whatever you got is because we worked. So kind of a, you know, buzzkill around Santa Claus, but it's all good. You know, everything worked out there. And I knew that, you know, that work ethic, I always hoped, I believed it was for something. And I do credit that work ethic instilled in me at a young age for helping me push through education and through my own education in my current role. Recently, both of my parents retired from working in public schools. They each took pride in contributing to a healthy and safe learning environment for students, except that they didn't work in an office. They worked in those essential, thankless jobs that kept schools functioning, right? A reality that I feel is highlighted even more by the public health crisis we're moving through today. My dad, Big Nachote, was a custodian. And my mom, Maria, was a food service worker at the same high school that I went to. So that was always pretty cool, knowing that, you know, she was making the lunches, in charge of a food service program for a fairly large school, high school. And so that was always pretty cool to me. And this picture here is my parents flanking me and my partner, who is also a PhD graduate from Iowa State University, the day that we conferred our PhDs. They're in Ames, Iowa in May of 2013. So I shared this picture because I've often thought about, why did these two folks insist so much, right, about siempre hay que ir a la escuela, like, especially since they hadn't gone to college, right? So like my youthful arrogance made me think like, well, what do you know, right? Like, what do you know about going to a place like college if you never went yourself? And what can you tell me about future earnings when you're struggling, right? So my arrogance didn't let me see through that. So when I attended Mount Sac, the community college prior, that was, you know, the closest one. Literally, that's where I can walk to. So that's why I went there. I would get frustrated and I would get impatient, right? Semesters wore on and the next semester comes on and you're just registering for classes and trying to get through those 60 units of general ed and trying to pick a major that you think might transfer. And so, you know, one semester at a time, trying to do my best, like my parents asked, staying out of trouble, just going to school. I would get on edge, right? I'd get frustrated taking, you know, trigonometry and calculus, and I ended up choosing mathematics as my major to transfer to. In time, what I did learn was that the lessons that my parents were sharing were often, you know, sprinkled with how opportunity had eluded them, how college was out of reach for them. and how they aspired for my brothers and I to do our best and be better than them, right? Their aspirations helped me set out to look for and thankfully find that elusive opportunity just to go to college. Like I just had the opportunity and I found the right people to help me find that. So here, you know, you have this mom and dad that you see in this photo, much like some of the mom and dads that maybe you know, maybe your own mom and dad. Immigrants from Mexico, smart, very smart, but lacking that formal education, right? No paper to say they're educated. And here they are seeing their son and daughter-in-law earn PhDs, right, from a land-grant university in the Midwest. I always think that's pretty awesome. So I feel that the lesson here is that these stories that we, you know, share with our families or anyone close to us. In my household, they were always with dichos, right? Like little sayings, refranes, right? Refrains, or I guess that's the best, proverbs, you know, like little sayings that we have in Mexican culture. They help set the early foundations as I started developing my own consciousness of systemic and ingrained problems of elusive educational opportunity facing not only our community, but other communities of color. So today I hope to be, you know, a transformational leader in support of my students' learning as they develop their own consciousness about the world that we share and that we seek to improve through our work in higher ed. So now my job has evolved to help others que vayan a la escuela, right? So now I think that I often think like I want to thank all the Nacho and Marias, all those immigrant parents in our lives who helped us get here today. So if you have that, take a moment, think about those people in your life that have helped you get here today. So again, for all of you in Colorado, I think I'm the only one in California. I just want to say thank you for sharing this space with me today, for allowing me to, you know, be a speaker for your organization. And I know that you could be doing a ton of other things. It's Friday, it's the middle of the summer, everyone's working from home. I understand that. And you've chosen to spend this time, you know, doing professional development, nurturing yourself, nurturing your professional relationships with colleagues all over the state so that you can better support Latinx students. So for that, I give you kudos. Working in higher ed is a big privilege many of us enjoy, and whether that is as a student, whatever position you're in, as a staff, as an administrator, faculty member, as I get into the content of my talk, I hope that you learn something new, or as I mentioned earlier, that you unlearn some of what you felt you knew about Latinx students. I hope to grow your social consciousness about others and hopefully about yourself as well. I'm a first-generation college student, college graduate, first-generation college professor, first-generation everything, right? And too often we hear these deficit perspectives about first-generation students being, you know, at risk, or how students like us aren't ready for college, or that Latino families don't value education. But unfortunately, these narratives are often reproduced, right, in our news media, through our current political structures, and sometimes even by the educators that we work with, right? We hear so many stories of students saying, I had a counselor tell me that I'm not college material, right? So what I hope to seek to offer, you know, through the sharing a little bit about myself is a bit of a counter story to counter that narrative, to challenge what we hear about our families, and find, identify, create new ways, imagine new ways of how to support Latinx students in community colleges. Because I know that our campuses aren't often safe places where conversations on race or racism can be had. Sometimes they're not even welcomed or tolerated, right? So we use organizations like COSEL as a place to come together, because we know that where we work, it might not be encouraged or welcome. Okay, so thank you for allowing me some time to share a little bit about myself. I feel that, like I said, it's really important for me to set some context there, okay? I'll transition into the bulk of the talk. I'll just say goodbye to my parents real quick since I'm seeing their photo. So the 5 Things series from NASPA again, I'm going to make a big assumption that a lot of you are familiar with NASPA. Even if you have not attended, you may have probably heard of them, or either subscribed to maybe an email listserv, or you've had colleagues talk about them, about NASPA. It's probably the largest professional association for student affairs administrators and practitioners in the United States. Really all over the world, they have people that join the association from universities across the nation, the world. So this five things series brief started back in 2013 as a joint venture partnership between NASPA's foundation and then the Research and Policy Institute. They wanted to be able to produce timely briefs, short pieces meant for practitioners that addressed current issues. And each publication that they do focuses on the quote unquote 5 things, right, that student affairs professionals can do to address a special topic, a student population, or one of the student affairs competency areas advanced by ACPA and NASPA. ACPA being the other leading student affairs practitioner association, okay? So some of the topic areas that have been written on in the 5 things series include civic engagement, developing surveys, gender-based violence, improving success of male students of color, our publication on Latinx student success at community colleges, supporting international students. In the follow-up and in the chat, I think I also provided the direct link already, but you can find this if you Google 5 things, my name, or 5 things, NASPA, Latinx, I'm sure within a Google search, you'll find this publicly accessible PDF document, okay? So we were approached, I was approached back in 2015, 16, to consider putting together a policy brief for this series, for the NASPA 5 things. Of course, I prefer to do my work in community. I prefer to do my work with co-authors, and so I enlisted the assistance of my department chair, my professional confidant, she's also my spouse, Dr. Susana Hernandez, who is an associate professor now and chair of the Department of Education Leadership here at Fresno State. She was a second author, and then Dr. Maggie de la Teja, who was she's now retired, enjoying retirement. She retired as a vice president for student development services at the Tarrant County College Northeast campus, and former president of BACHE, just a distinguished long career advocating for Latinx students in Texas, and in particular in community colleges. But she had a national perspective. She often engaged with colleagues and faculty all over the country through her work in NASPA. So the 3 of us sought to develop this 5 things piece, and so I want to give them a shout out, acknowledge them, that even though I'm the one delivering today's webinar, that it's shared work and that we did together. All right. Okay, so the 5 things are, we identified them here, I put them on this graphic. I'll go through each of the 5 things, and we'll have some time for discussion on the things, right? So we identified these 5 things through obviously a deep review of the literature, but also our own practitioner understanding, our own conocimiento, right? Our own understanding of how to best support students like us moving through higher ed and community colleges in particular. So there could be 100 things on this list, right? And so we were limited to 5. And so we're like, oh gosh, how do we identify 5? So we started with a long list and kept, finding ways to either combine or still discuss the item under the category or heading of another one of the items, right? And so The first was around preparation and competencies of student affairs professionals. We need to be able to help professionals earn that master's degree, earn whatever degree required to be able to be competent as they do their work. We need institutions to accept responsibility, right, on the institutional level rather than individual actors or putting the onus back on students. We felt that we needed to recruit and also retain Latinx student affairs professionals. Student affairs is notorious for burnout, right? Where we have low rates of satisfaction amongst new professionals, and they often leave the field too early. Our number 4 was to scale up programs and services, right? Too often we get caught in serving 10 students at a time, and that's effective and that could work, but we fail to hold our institutions accountable and not make whatever program or service that we're doing become a broader, larger institutional initiative, and we focus on leaving it at a small scale. So that's what we talked about on 4. And then finally, in number 5, Mary knows this well because she took this class with me, but I talk a lot about effectiveness and assessment and its connection to how that is actually, to me and some other authors on another project that we did, a social justice imperative too. If you are not accounting for the outcomes that you sought out to accomplish, then are you truly, who are you accountable to? Your accreditor or to your students, right? And so in this sense, that's sort of what we talked about here in number 5, and that idea has evolved over time as well. Okay, so I'll take us through each of the 5, and and then we'll have some time to discuss on how this might look like on each of your campuses, okay? Okay, so the first one was around preparation and competencies for student affairs professionals. Thumbs up if you've heard of this, right? You've heard of the, yeah, you can do the little reactions. Oh, you can do a little, there you go. Some of you got that little reaction on the little reaction button going, but if you've heard of the competency areas for student affairs professionals, again, make that in your notes. If you have not, it'd be a great follow-up reading for those of you who work in higher education in any role, right? It's a set of a listing of competency areas, essential knowledges that the field has agreed to be important for doing the work in higher ed, student affairs in particular. And for this 5 things piece, we focused on 4 of the 10 competency areas: social justice and inclusion, organizational human resources, leadership, and of course, AER, assessment, evaluation, and research. So as you read our piece, if you have some follow-up time to do that reading, we focus on saying that these competency areas, and specifically the social justice and inclusion area, is particularly relevant to serving Latinx students in community colleges. Its definition through the competency areas, how they define social justice and inclusion, is around the knowledge and skills and dispositions needed to create learning environments that foster equitable participation of all groups and seeks to address issues of oppression, privilege, and power. So this competency area asks us as professionals in higher ed to have a sense of our own agency and social responsibilities that include others, the community that we aim to serve, and the larger global context. Student affairs educators oftentimes, purport to be social justice oriented or social justice educators, but sometimes lack, follow through in being able to incorporate social justice practices into their day-to-day work. So just having some reminders or some guides to work from are really helpful. And so what we focus on, this thing number 1, was to raise our social consciousnesses and repairing past and current harms on our campus communities. Student affairs educators in community colleges, especially those at Hispanic serving institutions or emerging Hispanic serving institutions, large settings like that with many Latinx student enrolled and now becoming faculty and staff, you folks can apply the concepts of social justice and inclusion competency area to assess how effective your institution is in supporting the success of your students. Okay, so again, this first thing was around, do we have skilled people with the appropriate knowledge, skills, and dispositions in the appropriate roles, right? If you're director of whatever functional area, right, the associate director, the program coordinators, are those folks truly prepared, right? Are they staying currently prepared as the field evolves? Do they attend webinars like this? Do they do their effort to sharpen their skills and dispositions, right? So that's a big part of this first one. Sound good? Okay. All right, I'll transition us into number two. Number two had to do a lot with, we start by saying, first, we want you to read Valencia's work around deficit thinking, okay? Student affairs educators, we feel, we specifically cite Dismantling Contemporary Deficit Thinking, a 2010 book by Richard Valencia. We feel that that reading, that piece of scholarship is essential to helping you make sense of the social construction of that term I used earlier, at risk. Right? We hear that often, and that's a term that's housed in deficit thinking with roots that go all the way down to centuries-old conceptualizations of children deemed to be a public concern. Right? So we need to scrub away that at risk and the multiple permutations of at risk. Right? Whatever you might, people might dress it up differently, but they're still saying the same thing. So you got to be conscious of what you're hearing. I want us to scrub away that term at risk from our professional vocabulary. And it is particularly relevant and necessary in reshifting responsibility for student success to the institutions that enroll them, rather than just putting it on the students, right? So oftentimes we're like, well, students aren't ready, or this group of students isn't ready to learn. And we never really ask ourselves, okay, is our institution ready to teach these students, right? Is our institution ready to receive these folks? So institutional responsibility should matter to you all. It should matter because as you work either directly with community colleges, or if you work in a baccalaureate granting institution, you're likely receiving community college transfer students. So that institutional responsibility should matter to you because that quantifiable impact of community colleges is undeniable, right? What we're going to start seeing now is anytime the economy dips, we know community college enrollment tends to increase. People return to school, and an open access institution like community colleges will likely receive the bulk of our enrollment, and we need to keep asking our leaders, are we prepared to serve the students that we receive? Right? So accepting responsibility at the institutional level rather than at the student level, I think affirms our commitment to social justice and inclusion, right? It reminds us that this is not just a one-off or some passing fad, but it's a deep commitment by the institution. So we've talked about having prepared professionals that are competent, right? Prepared professionals who are aware of the various competency areas to do their work right. We shifted then into number two, talking about how institutions themselves should be responsible for the success of the students that they recruit and then enroll. What about the people that work there? What about you all, right? Like that are participating in a webinar like this, right? This is a call to leaders, right? To folks that either have direct hiring power, right? Or those that may influence who gets recruited, or those who may influence who is retained on staff at your colleges. So higher ed scholars for a while now have argued for increased recruitment and retention of faculty, of Latinx faculty for some time, right? Luis Bonjuan wrote a good piece in 2011 on this. And that research suggests that Latinx, Latino faculty can benefit the institution by engaging students in the classroom in ways that increase student success. We extend this assertion to apply it to our thinking of Latinx student affairs educators as institutional agents who are able to advance student success. So we're calling on institutions to recognize the value and importance of a diverse staff. We're calling on institutions to open pathways for professional development with cultural relevance. And in particular, we named 2 specific leadership development programs that are relevant for community college leaders. One is NASPA's Escaleras Institute. I think a few of you have done it. I think, Elena, I think you were a founding member or a founding participant in that. And then same with the National Community College Hispanic Council, NCCHC. It's an affiliate council of AACC, the American Association of Community Colleges. They still run a Leadership Fellows program. I'm a proud participant of that program back in 2012, I believe. And so that programs like that bring together Latino professionals in higher ed that are specific to us and that have culturally relevant pedagogy, participation, and that are guided by folks who want to support, to recruit and retain Latinx student affairs professionals or just staff all over higher ed are really important, and we're calling institutions to continue to do that. If you want to be able to support your Latinx students, then you should also be able to support your Latinx staff, right, and faculty. So while a lot of the conversations in leadership research have focused on succession planning, right? We're talking about like, well, if all these old presidents retire, who's going to take their place, right? We also start arguing in our piece here, number 3, in the third thing, is that there's a little emphasis in planning transitions for new student affairs administrators. What are we doing when folks leave the field, right? Just because they're not executives doesn't mean we don't need to think about what are we going to do when the director of the cultural center, right, moves on to their next opportunity, right? Have we thought about the good work that they've done and how do we sustain that momentum, right? So again, we argue that there needs to be recruitment, but also retention of Latinx student affairs professionals, and for institutions to be conscious of the role that they play in advancing student success. Okay. Okay, before I move on to 4th, doing good? Everyone okay? Or you want to crack your knuckles, or how do you all take break? That's my bad habit. I crack my knuckles still, and I need to drink a little bubbly water real quick. Kind of refresh a little bit, but okay. So I like kind of breaking the monotony, and I just want to make sure that folks are, taking deep breaths, right? Get to fill those lungs up. Normally, if you were in my classroom, I'd tell you to stand up. If you wanted to, if you can. I'd tell you to stretch up and down if you can, if you want to. We used to give each other high fives, can't do that no more. So if you want to just do a fist bump through your computer screen, take a deep breath and we're going to continue. We've got a couple more minutes here, so hang in there with me, okay? Number 4, the 4th thing was scale up our programs and services, and that had to do with using assessment practices to really look at asking key questions around, are there student needs that we're not addressing with our current services and programs, right? This was a big factor that Dr. De La Teja Maggie would often talk to us around, from an institutional level, from her perspective as a vice president, she often needed to be able to discuss items to talk to either the cabinet or the board of trustees, depending on what issue was being at play, right? So if you have a program coordinator saying, this is really working in my program and I'm serving 25 people, well, can we do this institutionally? What's the strategy? What's the finances around it? How much is this going to take of time and effort? and of human power, right? And so this was always really important in the piece. So if you read number 4, you'll see some strategies to think towards. And one of the items that we discussed was, as you scale up your programs and services, was being equity minded, right? And going back to some of the pieces we talked about in number 1 and number 2, and how to accept institutional responsibility. So if leaders are accountable for organizational change, then we need to be able to hold those leaders accountable to it, right? I mean, they don't just draw the big paychecks. It's about using strategies to think deeply about how we can help these students, and being smart about it, because we hope that our programs and services outlive us, right? So that we institutionalize these efforts, so that when we do leave the institution, hopefully the good work is going to continue and has enough momentum and institutional support. And it wasn't just, oh, that's the program that Nacho did, right? That's the program that Reina did, right? So that it could be something that institutions can own and carry forward. Number 5, again, our final piece here that we felt was important for ensuring Latinx student success in community colleges was around the competency area assessment, evaluation, and research. And that had a lot to do with, the ability for professionals to be able to demonstrate student learning, right? We need to be able to demonstrate that learning to the students, to themselves, right? To be accountable to them, but also to our own colleagues, our funding agencies, our accrediting bodies, right? And so some of the work that we discuss here has to do with how to support Latinx students. Educators need to emphasize institutional effectiveness. We want to talk directly to the IR professionals, institutional researchers, institutional effectiveness folks, who we feel play a central role. We're seeing more and more, specifically HSIs do this, where they're assigning professionals to have key roles in their HSI initiatives having to do with either institutional research or institutional effectiveness. One of the models I could think about is my dear friend and colleague, Marla Franco, over at the University of Arizona, who's doing a lot of really cool work through her role there, I believe it's like an appointed position through the HSI initiatives, but it's a lot about it. It's about presenting data and showing how institutional efforts are really working towards supporting their Latinx student population. And so again, it's just about calling attention to some of the unfortunate practices that do happen in assessment, where these assessment practices often are in conflict or don't make space for seeing student learning through the lens of power, understanding our own positions and these power relationships, to think critically about learning and knowledge, and to act in service of a more just society. Academia relies heavily on a positivistic scientific point of view. And this model utilizes, this need to demonstrate student learning by using quote unquote objective tests, right? And other business techniques to describe directly observable learning outcomes as the only paradigm, right? And so what we're trying to challenge is that you shouldn't only have to rely on quantitative and positivistic methodological approaches to do assessment work. So we're calling on folks to be able to pay attention to that tension in ideology and the practice of outcomes-based assessment, so that you can use more subjective, intuitive ways of knowing, acknowledging experiential knowledge, right? So that you could challenge that overemphasized quantitative data just to make comparisons. Like when we compare one student group, right, you're going to start, because that often feeds into those dichotomies of, like, you see, these Latino students aren't ready for college. And so we need to find new, more creative ways so that the information that we're using and sharing isn't used against us, right? And so often these assessment benchmarks, they fail to account for social justice outcomes and provide metrics that inhibit methodological creativity. So with that, that's that number 5 is, yes, do assessment, but remember, who's it for, right? Like, who are you being accountable to? because you want to retain accreditation and get your report done? Or are you truly doing it so that you can demonstrate that the work that you're doing is impacting student learning, right? So it's a hard task. We know that. And so what we're just saying is let's pay attention to it as we do it, and let's not just fall into doing what our accreditors say, okay? All right, I don't want to go over time, so I'm going to get us into a small breakout session. Those were the 5 things, folks. Those are the 5 things that we wrote about in the NASPA policy brief. And so what I'll do, we're going to put you all, like, can we do it for maybe like just like 3 minutes? A quick discussion.
Yep,
yeah,
I can do that. So
all right, so I'm going to put these discussion questions in the chat room so that you can see them. And depending on, so do the groups have a number, Joel?
Yes, so there should be, it's breakout room 1 through 10.
Okay, so if you're like, yeah, so groups, can we do like 1 and 6 and 2 and 7 and 3 and 8 and 4 and 9 and 5 and 10? Does that make sense? Like, so if you're 1 and 6, you will answer preparation and competent, the thing 1, right? And if you're 2 and 7, you're going to do number 2. Does that make sense? Yeah. So whatever group you go into, you'll discuss one of the 5 things. And then the questions I want to task you with is, how does your campus enact the thing, the recommendation, if at all? Hopefully it does. And then how can you and your sphere of influence advance this thing, this recommendation? Sound good? Okay.
Perfect.
Do I need to stop sharing?
No, I can. So I'm going to be sending folks into the room. It looks like we have about 5, maybe 6 people per room. So you'll have like a 3-minute countdown or like the 1-minute countdown as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now.
Great.
Yep,
And I've just added the discussion prompts into the...
Yep, so we do have a few folks who are not assigned. So for the folks who are not assigned right now, I'm going to put you into a room right now. We went back to an initial, so just hold on tight and I will send folks. So just go ahead, when you see the pop-up window to join a group, just go ahead and say join. I think I assigned all the folks who were not assigned at some point. I'm wondering if the reason, Andrea and Reina, can you hear me? Yeah, I wonder if the reason why you didn't get assigned is because you're set as co-host.
No, I just didn't go.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
I was like, I swear, like I don't have an option because it says that you're supposed to be in a room.
Well, it looks like Lorianne in Corina still need to be assigned.
Yeah, so right now, I think the only people that I have on the assignment is just Dr. Ignacio and Mary. So that means that everybody's has been assigned, but they still have to accept. So if they want to be moved, they have to accept like the invitation, I guess, if you will. Yeah, so
I'm going to be right back, okay?
Gotcha. Do I still keep recording, or are we going to record like the discussion?
I still have like the final closing section after this breakout.
Okay.
Let's stop recording and then we can record again when we begin.
So they don't get our chisme.
Yeah.
And I can edit the video too.
Perfect.
Okay.
Mira, edit.